Most men believe they govern themselves. But if they truly looked inward, they'd see a fractured council ruled not by reason, but by memory, fear, guilt, and old childhood ghosts. Plato wrote that the ideal state is ruled by philosopher kings wise, rational leaders. Freud, however, might say, there is no philosopher king in the mind, only a fragile ego negotiating between desire and shame. Imagine a man who seems in control: coffee, work, marriage. But beneath the surface, a war rages. Freud met many like him, successful, decent, but quietly falling apart. Their behavior wasn't governed by will, but by old wounds buried in the unconscious. In Plato's metaphor, the soul is a chariot pulled by two horses, one rational, one wild. The charioteer must control both. Freud mirrored this, the ego caught between the id's hunger and the superego's judgment. But unlike Plato's wise guide, Freud's ego is born from conflict, not wisdom. He treated a man friends who seemed to have it all, but kept sabotaging himself. Affairs, missed meetings, sudden guilt. It traced back to a father who praised, then shamed him. Success felt like betrayal. Happiness felt undeserved. Freud believed self-improvement begins with asking, who's really in control? Not the will, not the mind, but compulsion. True growth, Freud taught, isn't about more knowledge, it's about deeper honesty. You must face what's buried, the wound, the lie, the repeating pattern. Ask, why do I sabotage myself? Why do I fear peace? Who in me is afraid to be happy? In that confrontation, the ego grows not by silencing the unconscious, but by understanding it. Only then can the self begin to align. Like Plato's ideal state, the self finds order when the wiser part, forged in truth, begins to lead. He who does not wish to know himself must prepare to be ruled by what he cannot see. He thought he was evolving, meditation, journaling, gratitude. But one night, over a dish in the sink, he exploded. Tears followed, not for the fight but because he didn't recognize himself. Freud might have said, that came from the parts of you still locked in the basement. We believe we know ourselves, our thoughts, values, habits. But Freud warned, most of who we are lies hidden. Like an iceberg, only a sliver shows above water. The rest our trauma, guilt, fears rules from below. This hidden self reveals itself in patterns. The woman who always falls for emotionally unavailable men. The man who fears abandonment but pushes people away. These aren't habits, they're childhood scripts, played on repeat. Freud called this repetition, compulsion, the unconscious. Trying to resolve what it couldn't the first time. A child, born with needs, not logic, learns to adapt. If love only comes when he's quiet, he stays silent. If joy brings punishment, he stops laughing. That child becomes an adult, but the strategies stay. The ego, trapped between desire id and same superego, can't lead unless it wakes up. Its power lies not in control, but curiosity. Freud believed discomfort is a clue. Why does silence make you panic? Why does criticism sting so deeply? These are echoes, not of now but of then. Dreams, Freud said, are the royal road to the unconscious. In them, the hidden self speaks through symbols and emotion. A drowning dream reflects a suffocating life. A locked hallway hides an unspoken memory. The higher self isn't something you become. It's the truth already inside, waiting to be heard, and you find it not by climbing, but by listening to the pain, to the patterns, to yourself. In the stillness of the soul, we do not discover peace, we discover conflict. But only by hearing it can we ever be free from it. A patient once told Freud, "I meditate, journal, do everything, but the thoughts are still loud." Freud asked, "Have you tried doing nothing? No techniques, no distractions, just silence?" The patient flinched. "I can't, it's terrifying." Freud believed we avoid stillness not out of boredom, but fear. In silence, distractions vanish and what remains is the unconscious, buried pain, shame, unresolved grief. We cling to busyness because it keeps us safe from ourselves. Stillness isn't PCA's confrontation. The attic of the mind opens, forgotten memories, unmet needs, and voices we silenced long ago. Not to harm, but to integrate. Freud's patients, in moments of quiet, often heard truths. "You're pretending. You're still angry. You don't believe you deserve love." These truths don't scream, they whisper. But they only emerge when we stop shouting over them. One woman, Clara, lived a flawless life. She worked, volunteered, achieved, but had panic attacks at night. Why? She feared stopping. In stillness, she wasn't productive, she was vulnerable. But Freud helped her listen to the voice underneath. It didn't want to perform. It wanted to rest. Stillness isn't suppression, it's presence. To observe without fixing. To sit with discomfort without distraction. In that silence, the unconscious speaks, through dreams, through the body, through feeling. A clenched jaw may be unspoken anger, insomnia, hidden grief. Stillness lets the body say, "You are carrying too much." When we become still not to escape, but to listen, we begin to lead ourselves, not through force, but through understanding. And in that space, the true self finally whispers, "You were never broken, you were just unheard." There was a time man blamed gods for his suffering. Then he blamed systems, politics, and people. But Freud uncovered a deeper truth. Much of our suffering is self-inflicted, not consciously, but through unconscious repetition and denial. 1. Patient always felt betrayed by friends, family, lovers, but a pattern emerged. She chose the same people, tested them, pushed them. Her fear of abandonment created it. Freud gently asked, "What if the betrayer is already inside you?" This is personal responsibility, not guilt, but power. Saying, "This pain is mine," reclaims the ability to change. Blaming others keeps you helpless. We reenact what we don't heal. Freud saw it again and again. The ego avoids truth through projection, denial, and repetition. The angry man sees enemies everywhere. The control freak calls others manipulative. What's disowned within gets projected outward. Denial buys time, not peace. The truth returns, louder, harsher. One man blamed circumstance for his broken life, but beneath success lay pride, coldness, and fear. Eventually, he admitted, "I think I made everyone afraid of me." That wasn't shame, it was transformation. A door to freedom. Many refuse responsibility. They'd rather suffer than change. Freud saw this emotional stagnation, often where pain becomes identity. Taking responsibility shatters the story. Who am I if I'm not the victim? But only in facing that do we free ourselves from old scripts. Healing means mourning what never was, the ideal parent, the fair world. Letting go of those fantasies hurts but clears space for truth. Responsibility is daily. It means seeing your role, questioning patterns, and forgiving yourself for what you did to survive. Not perfection, but honest, committed growth. When you finally say, "This is my life," you stop waiting for someone to fix it and begin to own it. That is the beginning of real freedom. Some burdens don't show on the body, yet they weigh down the soul. Freud would call it the residue of moral failure and processed guilt, hidden betrayals, impulses we never faced. Society gives us ways to apologize, but the soul remembers what we did, even if no one else knows. Freud knew repression doesn't erase delays. What's buried returns as anger, dreams, addictions. A man sees himself as calm until he erupts. A woman believes she's pure but feels jealous and drawn to strangers. We don't betray others until we've betrayed ourselves. Moral purification, then, isn't religion, it's psychological survival. It's not about being good, it's about reclaiming our wholeness. Not through perfection, but reckoning. One patient, elegant and accomplished, hated herself. She couldn't accept love. She sabotaged joy. Why? Because years ago, she destroyed a friend's relationship out of envy. No one knew, but her unconscious did. It whispered, "You don't deserve happiness." Freud didn't shame her. He asked, "What wound caused this? What did you lose in betraying someone?" This is the beginning, not denial, but understanding. We can't change what we won't see. True healing requires facing our own darkness, not with pride, but with courage, not to punish, but to integrate. The worst things we've done are not the whole story, but ignoring them keeps us trapped. Most people sit in shame but never move to change. They feel bad but stay stuck. Real purification means confronting your patterns, noticing the urges, and choosing differently. There's no applause for this work, but the reward is deep. The ability to look in the mirror without flinching. When the fractured self is seen, envy, lies, guilt, it begins to heal, not to be perfect, but to be whole, to be honest, and to be free. There's no direct line between a lie told and a breakdown, but beneath panic, sadness, or insomnia, something hums: guilt, repressed truth, unresolved shame. Freud discovered that mental suffering isn't random, it's meaning misunderstood and morally mishandled. One man, admired and successful, couldn't sleep. Panic struck at night. He blamed stress. But beneath the surface was something deeper. He had built his life on manipulation. And though the world applauded him, his unconscious did not. The unconscious doesn't forget. It holds every betrayal, broken promise, and moral compromise. In words, but in dreams, symptoms, or a silent sense that something is wrong. And when the weight grows heavy, the mind begins to fracture. Freud saw that mental illness often arises from moral tension. When we act against our values, lie, deceive, betray, we split the psyche. And in that fracture, suffering grows. Not always loudly. Sometimes it's a quiet sadness, or numbness, or a desperate need to distract. A woman spent years in therapy naming her trauma, yet sadness lingered. Only when she admitted she stayed in a marriage for status, not love, did healing begin. Her sadness was the soul's protest against a false life. Real healing demands inner honesty, not perfection, but coherence where feelings, beliefs, and actions align. Freud believed that until we bring the unconscious into awareness, especially our moral failings, we remain divided. Insight alone isn't enough. We must act to change behavior, to take responsibility, to speak truth. Healing is when we stop pretending, face the silence without fear, and no longer need lies to feel safe. Freud never promised happiness, but through truth and self-confrontation, we can trade neurotic misery for freedom. A freedom where the heart, mind, and soul finally speak the same language. He had been to every church in the city, lit candles, sang hymns, wept beneath stained glass. But each time he came home, nothing changed. The shame still lingered. The anger slept in his bones. The same haunting thoughts followed him at the dinner table, in traffic, in the silence just before morning. One day, quietly, he stopped going. He didn't leave God. He just stopped expecting transformation from a building Freud would have recognized. This not as rebellion, but as the soul's quiet protest against ritual without revelation. He understood that people often suffer not from a lack of religion, but from mistaking ritual for redemption. They go through the motions, hoping structure will heal what only truth can touch. He never dismissed religion outright. Freud saw its function clearly. It gave people structure, identity, community. But he also saw the danger, a tendency to use it as a mask, a way to feel saved without ever being broken open, to call yourself transformed while still hiding from the truth of who you are. Real transformation, Freud believed, is not soft or ceremonial, it's brutal in its honesty. It doesn't happen at the altar, but in the mirror. It's not a performance for God or for others, but a private reckoning with yourself. And yet, we resist, because false religion is comforting. It says, you're fine. It says, you're forgiven. It lets you keep the addiction if you call it a struggle, the bitterness if you name it righteous anger, the pride if you kneel often enough. But something inside always knows when it's a lie, even if we never admit it, even if we sing louder to drown it out. Freud saw patients who spoke of being born again, yet carried the same dreams, the same fears, the same compulsions. They had accepted salvation, but not done the work. They had memorized the language of redemption, but left the soul untouched. True rebirth, he might say, isn't about believing new things. It's about shedding old masks, about facing the version of yourself built on fear, culture, and others' expectations, and asking, who am I without all that? And the answer isn't found in a moment of religious ecstasy. It comes slowly, painfully. It comes in the grief of realizing how long you've been performing, in the shame of what you've done while blaming others, in the aching years lost, 2 roles you never chose. The soul does not care if you've been baptized, confirmed, initiated. It only asks, have you changed? Not your routine yourself. Have you faced what you've been avoiding? Have you admitted what you've done to survive? Have you stopped pretending? This isn't a rejection of faith. If anything, it's a plea for a deeper, riskier one. A faith that doesn't offer comfort, but transformation. A God who doesn't just forgive, but demands you become someone new. Freud, the public atheist, was at heart a theologian of the soul. He understood that spiritual work looks a lot like therapy, long, hard, uncomfortable. Not about being better in the eyes of others, but about being honest with yourself. He treated patients who had memorized scripture yet still hated their parents, who knelt in pews but never forgave themselves, who performed piety but never faced their envy, their cowardice, their vanity. They changed behavior, not their hearts. To be born again, truly, is to become truthful. It's not about appearing spiritual, it's about being real. It means no longer outsourcing your morality to a priest or a book. It means facing what you've done, what you've become, choosing, day by day, to unbecome it. And on the other side of that death, something beautiful. The liar begins to speak the truth, even when it costs him. The woman who smiled through pain allows herself to rage. The man who wore stoicism as armor begins to cry. The child who carried generational shame finally lays it down. These aren't public acts. There's no applause. But in the language of the soul, they are sacred. They are holy, and yes, it is lonely. Because when you stop wearing the mask, those still hiding will feel threatened. They'll accuse you of pride or rebellion, but their fear is not your burden. You've begun something they haven't dared to begin. This journey can't be borrowed. You can't live someone else's awakening. You must lose yourself, dig, rage, mourn, and bury the false self without ceremony. But what rises? Peace, not the performance of peace, but the real thing, the kind that comes when nothing is left to hide. When the body, the mind, and the heart finally stop fighting, that, Freud would say, is rebirth. Not washed in water, but burned in truth. Not accepted by the crowd, but reunited with your soul. Not made perfect, but made honest. And if there is a God, and Freud, never fully closed, that door it is not one who counts sins, but one who weeps each time you betray your own wholeness. Who asks not for kneeling, but for presence. Who doesn't want perfections for you to feel again. So step out of the temple, go home, sit in the quiet. Let everything you've hidden finally speak, and listen, because that voice, that's where God lives. That's where you begin again.